so now I'm in the Battle City, and I'm gonna beat the shit out of this fucker right here. It's always better to go second, because you can't attack on your first turn. Alright, fucking, that's great. What?! Are you fucking kidding me?!
Is this you? Are you tired of your deck being overshadowed by other cooler decks? Do you hate mono red? Well then you clicked on the right video. Deck building is a complicated process. Well, obviously you know that. That's why you're here, right? Now, before you go, hey NixxenDox, don't you suck at this game? Why should I trust your advice? Don't worry, this video has been made with the help of a couple people, and I'm pretty sure I trust them all with what they're doing. Pretty sure. Now, before we begin, just remember this is not a definitive rulebook to what you should and should not do. It's a flexible process, yabba yabba, there's always exceptions. These rules do not apply to every deck. Alright, I'm trying to be as broad as possible, so don't expect any specific feedback. First, we have to figure out what deck you want to make. Now, there's a lot of different types of decks, but most of them will fall under one of these categories. Swarm/aggro, Control/mid-range, OTK/combo, and good stuff. Each list has a different way to keep tempo. Tempo is basically the momentum of the match, and you always want to keep this in your favor. Aggro is where you attempt to overwhelm your opponent in the early game. This is done through establishing a fast board state, keeping constant card advantage with draws, and many buffs. Swarm is a subtype of aggro, where it overwhelms the opponent by, as the name suggests, swarming the board with fighters. Typically, aggro decks are red or yellow or a combination of them, and establish tempo early in exchange for it falling off in the mid to late game. Now, mid-range is a much slower deck type. It spends the early game setting up stud generation for their big fighters later. It's a lot more sustainable for mid to late game tempo because big fighters are pretty big and they typically overwhelm aggro at that point. Very similar, but not the same, is Control. Control also has the same game plan, set up studs, get big fighters. But it typically attempts to slow the opponent down, which is done with several different tools like depower, return, lock, the list goes on, man. Typically, these decks are green or blue. Remember what I said, typically. Do not be fooled by mid to late game, because these decks can get win cons out very quickly. Hang on. Did I explain what win cons are? So, a win con, it just means win condition, win con. It can be a singular card, or a combination of them. But basically, casting this just means you win. This brings us very nicely into you've probably seen a lot of these just floating around and you want to try them out. Obviously. Don't. I get it, they look super awesome and they get really fast kills. But if you're new, you should not use them. They're super hard to pilot and they're really only intuitive for experienced players. They're not really beginner friendly because they have cards from all sorts of packs. Most of them are also, hopefully, pretty inconsistent, and one tiny mistake will cause you to lose the entire game. Again, very funny deck type. But for now, stay away. Now, good stuff is, as the name suggests, good stuff. It's a deck with good cards. But you may ask, what is good stuff? Good stuff is typically something you'd recognize as you progress, because you'll obviously have more experience of cards and what fits. Let's use Anonymous as an example. Doesn't really belong to any kind of playstyle, but that doesn't mean it's a bad card. In fact, it's an extremely good card. Really good red-green card. It's almost a staple. It's just a good card to have. See what I'm getting at here? If you're new, you should stick to simpler decks. This is typically monocolors and archetypes. For now, you should stay at Strife's Arsenal, because they teach fundamental game mechanics and skills. They're also monocolor, so you don't have to worry about managing all these different colors at once. Strife's Arsenal also has plenty of cards for every color, so there's no need to worry there. Once you feel confident, you can move on to Beckon's Masters and Ultimate Power, because they start introducing dual color archetypes like Alars and Bees. If you feel that you're more confident in experimenting on tricolors or harder game mechanics like the Syndicates or the new Doomspire, I recommend seeing how they play first, or trading for the cards instead of buying the whole pack, because they're pretty expensive. When collecting cards, do not forget about the auction. Contrary to popular belief, it is more than just a foil printer. I see you. It is much more cost effective to buy epic and legendary staple cards from the auction than to open packs. Not only is the chance to get an epic or legendary card from a pack pretty slim, it's also really expensive to open these. Precons are extremely good for collecting archetypes, and they even come with bonus cards that are usually staples for that deck type. They even have exclusive archetypes which are called Metaverse Series, but I would avoid those actually, because they're usually quite complicated. Precons allow you to see various different types of playstyles, and they save you a whole lot of money. However, some are a lot more complicated than others. I would avoid Pixies, Cash Grabs, Yore, Neo Dragons, Vagabond, Stagnation. Let's say you've chosen your deck type. I'm gonna choose Aggro Doges, because they're an archetype and they make pretty funny noises when they die. This means I want to run AoE buffers and cards that summon more, which, thankfully for me, are already included in the Doge pack. Wow, it's gonna be my lucky day. Maybe I would want to include red, but in this hypothetical situation, I am extremely poor and stack absolutely no paper, so I do not have proper red cards that synergize with this deck. Now, the fact that I hypothetically stack no paper is very important. As a new player, you most likely do not have the necessary cards to build more than a monocolor. Do not include cards from other colors into your deck, because 9 times out of 10, they'll stick out like a sore thumb and you won't be able to cast them or discard them. Now, another thing to consider is the starter you choose. Now, what's a starter? A starter is a card that costs anywhere between 1 to 4 colorless studs, and facilitates a turn 1 play. You can tell what's a starter as they have a green leaf icon in the deck builder. Different deck types will want different types of starters. Usually, archetypes don't have to worry because their starter is already really good. Usually. Looking at you, Hellish Furniture. Why are you so trash? Infernus slander aside, faster decks will want to choose starters that give you card advantage, a board state, ramp, or is cheap. Meanwhile, slower decks will want starters that establish stud generation or start drawing out their big fighters. Sometimes, you don't even need a starter, and you can rely on pseudo-starters. Now, these are cards that can be played turn 1, you usually discard, but they don't count as starters by the game. Generally, you should include a starter to be more consistent. 6 to 8 starters is always a good benchmark, but it's up to you. I don't even follow the rule personally, because I just love pseudo-starters. But 6 to 8 always gives you a consistently good turn 1. And 8 starters guarantees a starter, except for that weird bug. The amount you should include really depends on your liking, as they're generally only good for the early game. Exceptions apply. Your stud generation in the early game typically relies on your starter. Take this into account and choose carefully. Archetypes are not locked to only the archetype starters, and they can run more if see fit. You know, now that I think about it, it would be nice to have 4 yellow studs turn 2, because that means I can cast Mike, who's a very good AoE buffer. I'm gonna run Devrolf with my Shamrock Doge starter, because that means if I discard, I'll have 4 yellow studs by the end of my turn. Wow! Not only that, but that also gets me up to 6 starters, which means I have a much easier time establishing tempo over my opponent. I mean, this deck is cool, but I'm still missing cards. What am I missing? Wait, before I go on, I need to explain what the mulligan system is. Now, this is probably really confusing, but if you do want to know how starters actually work, this is how the game works. At the start of a game, you draw 2 hands, and the game will pick the hand with the number closer to your starter amount. Remember, the game doesn't count pseudo starters as actual starters, so they're not affected by the mulligan. Just keep that in mind. Synergies are ways that cards work with other cards. Whoa. When making a deck, you should always think of cards that have synergy with your playstyle. Think, will this card benefit my general game plan? If it does, move down to question 2. Is this card reasonably priced so that I can afford it? If it does, move to question 3. Will this card be consistently useful throughout the game? If so, it's an easy pick. If not, you don't have to remove it completely. You can just run less copies. Now, let's say, hypothetically, a very nice person has blessed me with these 3 cards. Before I run through the questions, I'm gonna give you 3 seconds to think. Psst, you can cheat by pausing the video. Okay, time's up. Let's run through them. 1. Will this card benefit my general game plan? Since I'm using doges, I definitely want a lot of draw, so Gert is pretty good here. I also want to overwhelm my opponent quickly, so the unlock from Divine Tengu would be super helpful. But I don't really have anything that targets here. Not only that, merely giving 1 big fighter isn't really great here, because I don't really want to cost 1 fighter and then pass my turn. So he's out! Alright, question 2. Is this card reasonably priced so that I can afford it? Now, let's see how... Ah! Good heavens! He's how much? 10 yellow? No, I'm not. I'm not affording that unless I'm already in a winning position, man. But Gert, he's only 2 white, 2 yellow. That's totally affordable. Question number 3. Will this card be consistently useful throughout the game? Now, if I draw Gert at the very beginning, he won't really do anything. However, I'm most likely gonna get crowd's favor at turn 2 or 3, so I'll be able to cost it early. After that, it's always gonna be useful. So, it looks like our lucky winner is Gert! Congratulations! You win a spot in our lovely Doge deck. A nice way to see potential cards that have nice synergies is to click Show Unowned in Deck Builder and type in keywords with your color selected. For example, this Doge deck could like Gain Health and Power, Token Fighters, and Draw. Ding, ding, ding. Whoa! Look at that! There's this card called Rasta My Pasta that gives not only insane stud gen, but it also buffs! You still don't get synergies? Well, that's okay, cause I've got a really good example for you that I definitely wasn't bribed to bring in. Introducing the Rubber Duck. Let's go over it. The Rubber Duck's effect is... nothing. Wait, what? Nothing? Nothing at all? This card seems useless. Nah, you're not thinking properly. Think about the synergies. 1. You can discard it. Now, you think, what does that mean? Well, if you discard it, there are a lot of cards that trigger whenever you discard a card. And you definitely don't want to be getting rid of those nice, beautiful cards, do you? Not only that, you can clog it in your hand. There's a lot of cards that benefit of having a lot of cards in your hand. Not just that, you can give it to your opponent as well, so they'll lose out on valuable space in their hand. Now, do you see how this simple, useless, well not useless, but simple Rubber Duck has so many synergies? Well, I hope you do, Huh? Oh. Hang on. The music just stopped. That must mean this next part is serious. I'm not talking about the run-of-the-mill auto-includes, but I will go over them later. I'm talking about auto-includes for a playstyle. Generally speaking, there will be some cards that are just so good for your deck that they'll automatically run. While these provide a good framework to your deck, you need to remember that your list is different to someone else's. Odds makers may work in that red, green, yellow rage list, but it might not work in your mono red rage list. You need to stop and think. What does this provide to my deck? And why is it generally considered an auto-include? Let's go back to what I said earlier with Anemones. Obviously, very good card. But does this mean you should always run it in red-green? No! The main reason why it's not always run is because of its 3 white cost. That's expensive, man! And if your deck is consistently using white, I don't think you should be using it. Ooh, I just had a peep at someone else's mono-yellow deck, and they use Typheus the Whelp, which seems to be an auto-include in those aggro-yellow decks. I think it would fit perfectly here, because more unlocks means more times to beat down the opponent and more funny Doge death sound effects. Seriously, they're hilarious! Now, onto the more important auto-includes. You all know what I'm talking about. Pay attention to this part very carefully. These cards are a great evil. Yes, they're game-changing and can completely turn the tables in your favor. But if you rely on these cards to win, they'll affect your deck building because you're relying on it too much as a crutch. But people are also going to figure out and they're going to play around them when fighting you. Use these cards carefully. Know when including them is useful, but don't use them as a crutch. You should only use them if they counter a weakness to your deck. For example, let's say I'm using a very nice green deck, but my opponent keeps beating the crap out of me before I can set up. They always get the 7 to 8 fighters, and they never seem to go back down to 6. In this scenario, MTH and Bobaman would be very good to teach this punk a lesson. But I'm not using a very nice green deck, unfortunately. I'm using this Doge deck, and I don't think I'm weak to Swarm, because I am the Swarm. Maybe if I'm fighting bees, I will use MTH. But since I'm a nice innocent new player who has no idea what a bee even is, I won't use it. These cards typically get a lot of hate because of their overuse. That's because they're really good. I mean, MTH is able to have a reputation because it's a really damn good card. So, running these cards are not bad. You can quote me on that. If you got completely wiped by one of these cards, you should try and hold back. Don't overextend. Unless it's that stupid MTH bargain combo. Ugh, that one sucks. Card advantage. What is card advantage? It's basically how you keep more cards in your hand than your opponent. Simple. Card advantage leads to tempo. Whoever has more card advantage typically has more momentum because they've got more responses to cards and more cards to play. There are many ways to get card advantage, and you can have more than one type in a deck. These include draw, random add, recur, and hand hate. Let's go over them really quickly. Draw is exactly what you think of when someone says card advantage. The more draw you have, the quicker and more consistently you can have good cards. In this deck, I only have Gert. I could run Power of Popularity as a secondary form of draw, but I'm not really sure. Maybe I'll run Pot of Gold. Random add is also pretty self-explanatory. It's where you add random cards to your hand. Random add is typically used for stud generation early game, but decks with plenty of stud generation, like green or rainbow, will use this to pull random fighters out and keep the tempo going. in this Doge list, I could use cards like Ugly Po and SSSQD to give me more cards. But since I can already rely on draw and my ramp is pretty weak, I won't use them. Recur is, despite what the devs tell you, is a newer mechanic, and the earlier packs won't really have it. If you're desperate for Recur cards, they're typically found in Necro Syndicates. Recur is obtaining a card from your graveyard. This is really good and super consistent, because why would you not want an extra copy of a card? Now, Recur is typically used for mid-range to control decks, because it's more useful for them to get a singular copy of a card. While I know I can use Enzyme Runner for Recur, it eats up a lot of my white, and I don't really have a singular card I would run a Recur. Maybe Doge, but it's not worth it, so I won't include it. Now, Hand Hate is evil card advantage. I'm serious. Instead of giving yourself more cards, you get rid of the opponent's cards. It's very mean, and it's typically only for red. Now, sniping crucial cards from your opponent can completely disrupt their tempo, and can even cause them to lose entirely. Since I don't really have any Hand Hate options in yellow, I can't really add this to my Doge deck. Now, it's great to include this, but don't overdo it. Too much card advantage results in a lack of substance. If you have all this draw, what are you drawing to? You're gonna brick, and you won't be able to maintain a board state. If you're sharp, you're probably thinking, wait, there's gotta be more ways to maintain tempo, right? Well, that's where interaction comes in. Look, this green screen costs a lot, alright? Let me use it. Anyways, interaction is how you deal with your opponent's board. Simple as that. There's so many ways to do this, including destroy, obliterate, depower, dust, lock, return, transform, board wipes your board. Now, there's a lot more, so don't go around saying, oh NixxenDox, you forgot to spend, or this mechanic, or this new mechanic that came out. I said including, okay? Now, your board is self-explanatory. You to interact with your opponent's board with your own. Now, destroy or obliterate is typically used on singular fighters. These are handy to get rid of mid-range. There are many other options to get rid of big fighters, but these are the main methods. The difference between destroy and obliterate is destroy triggers effects on death, while obliterate doesn't. Also, destroy sends a copy to the graveyard unless it's fading, and obliterate doesn't. Basically, obliterate is the card never existed in the first place. No questions asked. Now, depower or dust is lowering the power of your opponent's fighters. This allows you to attack them while keeping yours alive. This also might completely negate the effects of fighters that double their power or have effects when they destroy another, which can completely slow your opponent down. Locking is locking your opponent's fighters. If they can't attack, how can they gain tempo by killing your fighters? Transform is turning your opponent's fighter into something completely useless. Transform typically completely removes the card's ability to generate useful studs, so doing this can disrupt their tempo. While it's easier to get than destroy or obliterate, people call it soft removal because the threat is still there. You may have transformed that super buff I Am Logic, but that's still a super buff cow, and that's pretty scary. I wouldn't want to mess with a beefy cow. Return is moving your opponent's card back into their hand. This is great because not only does it prevent it from attacking, they also have to spend studs to cast it again. It also uses up a card slot, meaning you could destroy their next draw. A cool interaction that I'm surprised not everyone knows about is if you return a card when your opponent has 10 cards in their hand, it gets obliterated. That's right, it doesn't even go to the graveyard. Balanced. There are two types of board wipes: soft wipes and hard wipes. Soft wipes are typically just effect damage, like Cawthron Gorillas or Mecha X. Look, don't ask why all these examples are green, alright? I couldn't think of anything else. They're soft because if a fighter has damage immune or moon ward, it's like tickling them with a feather. Hard wipes are the big ones. They're destroys or obliterates, and they affect the whole board. And a good example of this is Ecocide. Thanks, NixxenDox 2024. This is NixxenDox 2025, coming at you with a new card type. So listen up. Gears are a new card type that are similar to actions in the sense that they don't have any bodies. However, they either increase or decrease the stats of the fighter it's attached to, and can also give extra effects. For example, this red laser scythe will give my fighter 200 extra health and 600 extra power, while this flaw will reduce the health of a fighter by 100. Gears are an extension of your board as a form of interaction, as you can use them to give your fighters an extra bit of damage or health to perform efficient trades, or attach them to enemy fighters for detrimental effects. Now, since this deck is super fast and doesn't really need to interact with the opponent because of how fast I am, I think I won't run any of these actually. Now remember, just like card advantage, too much interaction is a bad thing. If you're only using stuff like script or gravity coil without really placing anything threatening down, you will eventually run out of interaction and die horribly. Ramp is how many studs you generate. Simple as that. Some decks have external ramp tools that allow them to reach a certain amount of studs. For example, the Surgeons of Peace gives you 5 green studs, which allows decks to cost more expensive top ends like Poklolio and Ancestral Martyr. Typically, faster decks will rely on their board state and card advantage for ramp. Remember, more cards in your hand means more cards to discard and more cards to get studs. Lots of draw will correspond to lots of base plate fodder and therefore lots of studs. Since my Doge deck is super fast and most of my cards are pretty cheap, I don't think I need to include any extra means of ramp. I think that my draw is enough ramp. Plus, I've already got a card that gives me discard fodder in my Doge package. What a nice package, man. Devs really have everything figured out. Now, your stud curve is how many studs you typically get each turn. Now, you should pick cards according to this curve. What do you mean by this, NixxenDox? Let me explain. This is a typical example of a green game. Turn 1, discard 2 cards, cost David II, and cost Green Belt Surveyor. This means that turn 2, you'll have 4 green studs, and if you base play another card, that makes it 5. Now, that means you should typically run a card that costs 4 to 5 green studs, like Van Johnson or Nimbles. This does not mean you should run a bunch of 6 green cards. This is cause it wouldn't really fit your curve, cause turn 3 you'd be expecting 7 to 8 green studs. Each deck has a different stud curve. This isn't just for mono decks either. Dual, tri, and even rainbow decks have a stud curve. Adding a bunch of rainbow cards with no means to avoid them sets you up for failure. Therefore, it's vital you consider your ramp and stud curve. Don't include cards outside of your stud range, and don't add too many cards of the same cost. This one is pretty hard to see just by looking at your list. So, the best way to discover this curve is through fighting! Which brings us to our next point. You've finally done it! Your deck is complete! Does that mean you finished? No! Aww, don't be sad. You're almost done. Not many people make a great deck straight off the bat. This is where testing and evaluating comes in. Test your deck on a friend, or an AI like Tarbot or Rasta. Early players, up to level 10 I think, can queue up the battle bots, and these offer good battle feedback. Just beware, it takes around 5 hours total of grinding to get to level 10, so that's when you stop fighting these battle queue bots. See how your deck handles aggro, its stud gen, and its overall tempo. From there, you can make adjustments accordingly. Remember, you're never truly done testing, and even when you finish the deck, it's not done. Always find ways to improve. There's over 4,000 cards in this game. There's no way that you've considered all of them for your list. That's a lot of cards. Now, that's why you have other people to help. If you didn't know, Blox Cards has a Discord server, link in the description. Don't join this if you're under 13. I emphasize this, do not join if you're under 13. The mods will know. Trust me. They just do. Anyways, in this server, they have a forum where you can post your decks and ask for feedback. Before you do this, you should get a feel for how it plays and its general issues. There's also a community-run deck reviewer, but no guarantees it gets reviewed. It's a pretty good place for feedback though. You can trade for cards here as well, or you can beg for them if you're that desperate. But come on, you're better than that. Now, don't feel heartbroken if someone says it sucks, or if it fails. Don't also blindly take someone's feedback. Ask them, what would this change achieve? Would this fit my deck's playstyle? Is the issue with the cards in the deck or the deck in general? Do I like using this card? There is such a thing as an objectively bad deck. Like an unwanted trend deck. Keep that in mind. If you make a joke deck intentionally and get mad when others call it bad, that's on you. Look, I get it. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But don't worry! The more you play this game, the more intuitive everything will become. Deck building will be a natural thing for you, and you'll be subconsciously thinking all of this. I guarantee the more you experiment, the better you'll get at deck building and Blox cards in general. Try some crazy things. Don't be afraid. Don't stick to one color like me for 50 levels. Play with a bunch of decks. Have fun! Thanks for sticking around, and make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell, notifications, and give me your money. Right. Bye!